Dear Patriots, before the news starts, please subscribe to our patriotic channel by clicking the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up to this video. Don't forget to leave your opinion below in the comments section. Share the news on Facebook and Twitter so your friends see it. Thank you.
Mulling Manafort's unusual two-trial strategy. Paul Manafort's defense seems to be heeding Alan Dershowitz's advice. Manafort's attorney's decision to effectively force some, but not all, of special counsel Robert Mueller's case against him to Northern Virginia baffled many lawyers, since it puts Manafort at risk of two separate trials rather than one. To some, it's akin to choosing to play Russian roulette with two bullets in the gun instead of one. However, because the Alexandria-based federal court's docket is known for providing quick trials, there's a possibility that Manafort could get to trial on bank and tax fraud charges in Virginia before the September 17 trial date set Wednesday by Judge Amy Berman Jackson in Washington in the original case, now scaled back to focus on money laundering and failure to register as a foreign agent. That means Manafort has a chance of getting his case before a Northern Virginia jury first, a panel more likely to include Trump supporters who may be skeptical of Mueller's enterprise. Such jurors are likely to be a rarity in Washington. There's no question the jury pool will be better for him in Virginia, said one attorney who declined to be named because he's representing a witness in the Mueller probe. It's definitely a risky gambit. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz landed in hot water last year when he declared in an interview that a Washington, D.C., jury has an ethnic and racial composition that might be very unfavorable to the Trump administration. Some Democrats, like Representative Maxine Waters, Democrat California, responded by blasting Dershowitz as a racist. However, even setting racial issues aside, it seems beyond dispute that Virginia jury could be less friendly to Mueller and more friendly to the defense. While a solid majority of Virginians who live near Washington voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, the Alexandria court's jury pool includes places like Fauquier County, which went for Trump, 59% to 35%. In Washington, voters overwhelmingly preferred Clinton, 93% to 4%. If Manafort could pull off an acquittal in Alexandria or even a hung jury, it could fuel President Donald Trump's view of the Mueller probe as a prolonged witch hunt that is more persecution than prosecution. That would seem certain to lead to calls for Mueller to abandon the D.C. case and might prompt a pardon from Trump or some action to shut down the special counsel's office altogether. Even if nothing so dramatic happened, a stumble for Mueller's team in Virginia and in its first contested trial could raise pressure for prosecutors to be more flexible in negotiating a plea deal. How viable Manafort's strategy is could become clear soon, when Judge T.S. Ellis III, a Reagan appointee in senior status, arraigns Manafort on the Virginia charges and provides some hints of what timetable is likely for the Alexandria case. That hearing was scheduled for Friday afternoon, but appears likely to be postponed after federal offices and courts in the Washington area closed for the day due to high wind conditions. Through spokespeople, attorneys for the defense and prosecution declined to comment for this story. Jackson has imposed a gag order that limits public comment about the case by attorneys in the defendants. Many lawyers warn that whatever marginal advantage Manafort's team may see in the Virginia jury pool could be more than offset by the pro-prosecution bent of the Alexandria-based judges. He's paleo, one D.C. defense attorney said of Ellis, predicting a rough ride for Manafort's defense. As a general matter, they're insanely pro-prosecution over there. While Manafort's team has managed to complicate Mueller's work by forcing him into two different courts, Mueller has also upped the ante in recent weeks. As prosecutors added the bank and tax fraud charges to the mix, they also increased in the amount of money Manafort allegedly laundered from $18 million to $30 million. Prosecutors told Ellis in a written filing Wednesday that the increase means Manafort, 68, now faces about 16 to 19 years in prison under federal sentencing guidelines, if convicted, compared with about 13 to 16 years under the earlier charges. The major determinant of how long you go to jail for is how much money was involved, said former federal prosecutor Patrick Cotter, now with law firm Greensfelder, Himker, and Gale. The evidence Mueller has laid out, the nature of the charges and Manafort's background as a high-flying lobbyist have many defense lawyers convinced that the cases are certain to result in some type of plea deal because no jury is likely to be sympathetic to him. The decision last week by Manafort's longtime aide Gates to plead guilty and cooperate with Mueller's office only underscored the challenge facing Manafort's defense. "This is not a triable case," said former federal prosecutor Peter Zeidenberg, now with the law firm Armed Fox. However, one factor that makes the Manafort case different from other white-collar cases is what some view as the possibility of a presidential pardon. That prospect limits Mueller's leverage and increases the incentive for Manafort to keep fighting at every turn. One downside to this strategy: it's expensive, as Manafort will be running up legal bills at a rapid clip. Manafort does have another option that would limit Mueller's office to a single trial: try to move the entire case to Virginia for convenience. Jackson noted that prospect Wednesday, but neither side's lawyers weighed in on her comment. In terms of sheer numbers, Manafort now faces 18 counts in Alexandria and just 5 in Washington. He could argue that with the bulk of the charges pending in Virginia, it's a more logical forum for the case and that having one trial would promote judicial economy. Indications that the Alexandria federal court's docket would allow a speedier trial could also bolster such an effort, since docket crowding is one factor judges typically consider. There's certainly an argument for consolidation here, and I think either court would be open to transfer for the purpose of trying this whole thing once, said one prominent defense attorney, who asked not to be named because of his firm's connection to the case. At the moment, though, there's no indication that Manafort's defense will make such a request. And whether to grant it would be at Jackson's discretion. She and Manafort's chief defense lawyer Downing have had a series of prickly interactions in the courtroom, suggesting she might view such a move as gamesmanship by the defense, especially since Manafort's team had the option to agree to a consolidated trial in Washington. "I think she will be less likely under those circumstances to agree, if that offer was on the table and they said no," the defense attorney said. Andres seemed to drive that point home at Wednesday's hearing, bracing for future defense complaints about the dueling trials and perhaps even the possibility of a transfer motion. "Judge, this is by no way in any means criticism of the defense. But as you know, we anticipated some of these issues and offered the defense the opportunity to waive venue in the Eastern District of Virginia, and they decided not to, which is obviously their right," he said. The prosecutor also took time to reiterate, even after Jackson set the September trial date, that Mueller's team, which originally proposed a May trial date, is eager to get the case to trial quickly. "Just for the record, the government is ready to go to trial and wants to go to trial as soon as possible," Andres said. Some news coverage of the Virginia indictment said Mueller had little choice to split the case up because defendants facing a criminal tax evasion case have the right to be charged in their home district. But the law on that point is nuanced. After a series of cases that prosecutors were forced to pursue in 2 or more places, including the Watergate special prosecutor's case against President Nixon's tax lawyer Frank DeMarco, Congress changed the venue provision in 1984 to apply the home district rule only in cases in which the sole charge stemmed from filing of a false tax return. Former federal prosecutor Lori Levinson said that, as a result of the change 3 decades ago, the perception that tax cases have to proceed near a defendant's home is not fully accurate. In a 1987 case stemming from the savings and loan crisis, she won a ruling keeping an 11-defendant case in Los Angeles in that city, despite efforts to split it up. In Manafort's case, prosecutors' ultimate decision to file the tax and bank fraud charges against him in Virginia seems to turn not on the special rule for locating tax cases, but on the more basic problem that prosecutors don't have evidence that acts relating to those specific crimes took place in Washington. The special counsel's office proceeded before the grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia because, based on our current evidence, venue for these charges does not exist in the District of Columbia, prosecutors wrote last week in a filing formally notifying Jackson of the Virginia indictment. Nerdcast is Hope Hicks gone for good? It's time for episode 96 of the Nerdcast, Politico's podcast on the White House and politics. Tune in each week to geek out with us as we dive deep into the political landscape and the latest numbers that matter. Subscribe and rate the Nerdcast on Apple Podcasts. Listen on your smartphone here, listen on your desktop here. Data point 5. Since December 2016, President Trump has gone through 5 communications directors. Hope Hicks is the latest one to be exiting 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Data point 18. Paul Manafort has 18 counts of tax and bank fraud against him in just one of the 2 indictments the former Trump campaign chairman is facing. Conservatives floored by Trump's gun control lovefest. Minutes into Donald Trump's renegade embrace of the left's wish list for gun control, Republican Representative Warren Davidson's phone lines blew up. "What is Trump doing?" texted one angry constituent from his conservative Southwest Ohio district, according to Davidson. "You've got to stop this," demanded another. "That can't be real," Davidson recalled thinking as his supporters, all Trump enthusiasts, unloaded on the president. Then he reviewed the full video clip. "I was like, you are kidding me, right?" he said in an interview. "It was a bit shocking." Trump threw decades of party orthodoxy on gun rights out the window on Wednesday, as he mused aloud about enacting a comprehensive gun control package and said due process should come after guns are taken away from dangerous people. The response on Thursday among congressional Republicans was a mix of disbelief, denial and outrage. The GOP has its rifts on hot-button issues like immigration and health care. But its devotion to expansive gun rights has been close to absolute. As Senator John Thune, RSD, put it, "Everyone says it's the NRA that explains the GOP's devotion to the cause. No. It's your constituents. Most of the ideas will not improve safety of our schools and protect our kids," said Senator Steve Daines, Republican Montana, a staunch gun rights advocate. "When it comes down to it, his administration will have a problem," Representative Dave Brett, Republican Virginia, said of Trump's call to increase the age for some firearm purchases or to seize weapons in some cases without a court order. But Trump is still president. So they were more prone to rationalize or explain away his apparent openness to an assault weapons ban and more background checks, among other items on gun control advocates' policy menu, than to go after him directly. Maybe Trump didn't mean what he said, some of them mused, or perhaps had been misunderstood. Others held out that he would come to his senses and quickly end his flirtation with Democrats. That was yesterday. This is today, said Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, a state that overwhelmingly supported Trump. "Anytime you have somebody wanting to take away life, liberty or property without due process, that is a concern," added Senator Mike Lee, Republican Utah. "I would like to figure out what he meant. I don't know how much thought he put into what he actually was saying, in terms of the details of it," offered Senator Shelley Moore Capito, RW. Virginia. Republicans have adopted a strategy of not necessarily taking what Trump says in showman mode at face value. Meeting with Democrats and Republicans at the White House in January, he talked up liberal immigration proposals only to backpedal later, when conservatives howled. It doesn't do much good, Republicans reason, to attack the leader of their party over a position he might not hold for more than a couple of days. And practically speaking, it will be nearly impossible for Congress to pass much more than a bill to improve background checks, given the hardened GOP opposition. Even a modest background checks bill is being held up by Lee and like-minded conservatives, who say it would trample the due process rights of veterans. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, RCI, has balked at a guns debate in the immediate aftermath of the massacre of 17 people in Florida, a delay that could sap the energy of gun control activists. If he embraces some of the things he talked about yesterday, a lot of folks up here on our side are not going to be for some of that stuff, Thune said of Trump's gun push. While Republicans think it's important to discourage the president from upsetting his rural, gun-loving base, most have taken to privately registering those feelings of discomfort with the White House rather than dressing down the president publicly. It's a courtesy they never extended to President Barack Obama after his calls for tougher background checks. Instead, most Republicans spent Thursday highlighting the problems with Trump's seeming support for proposals advocated by the likes of Senators Dianne Feinstein of California and Chris Murphy of Connecticut. "I'm a firm believer that due process means that you get a lawyer, a trial, a hearing, an impartial court making a decision before any of your rights are taken away," Senator Rand Paul, RCI, said of Trump's call to take the gun first, go through due process second. House Freedom Caucus founder Jim Jordan, Republican Ohio, similarly shied away from criticizing Trump personally, while firmly rejecting the bulk of the ideas the president floated Wednesday. Jordan emphasized similarities with Trump's viewpoints on arming teachers, and turned his criticisms toward Democrats instead of the White House. "On the most fundamental level in Florida, we had the most systemic failure of government to deal with this bad guy, and now we're supposed to say the answer is more government?" he asked. "The premise that so many on the left have, so many Democrats, I just don't buy into that premise." "But didn't Trump buy that premise?" "All I know is the answer is not more government," Jordan replied. "There's a smaller faction of Capitol Hill Republicans who've attacked the president personally on guns." Representative Thomas Massie, RCI, who leads the House's gun caucus, tweeted Thursday that like liberals, at real Donald Trump mentions Columbine, Pulse, Sandy Hook to motivate gun control, but totally ignores how guns were acquired, Columbine, straw purchases, Pulse, registered security guard, Sandy Hook, stolen. Disgraceful. There were a few Republicans who applauded Trump. They included Senators Jeff Flake of Arizona and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, who are pushing proposals to raise the age limit for buying some rifles and to enforce background checks for internet and gun show sales. "He was enthusiastic about it," beamed Toomey after Trump lavished praise on his background checks plan. The pair of GOP senators and some Democrats, meanwhile, held out hope that perhaps Trump could finally break the entrenched politics of gun control by getting behind common-sense regulations. It's one thing when a Democratic president calls for stricter gun rules, it's a different equation when a pro-NRA Republican president does so. "There's no one concerned about Donald Trump taking their Second Amendment rights away," Manchin said. "That still might be wishful thinking." Senators said Trump would struggle to move all but a handful of Republicans in the Senate. And in the more conservative House, prospects for new gun laws look even bleaker. "There's no changing minds," said Senator Jim Inhofe, Republican Oklahoma,